Welcome to the Lazy CEO Podcast, where Jim Schleckser, author of Great CEOs Are Lazy and founder of the CEO Project, features compelling experts and topics for CEOs of mid to large-size companies. Now, let's get started with the show.
Welcome, everybody, to another Lazy CEO podcast. I'm Jim Schleckser, the founder of the CEO Project and your host for this podcast. Today, we have a guest, and I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation. We have a gentleman named Nick Wilkinson. Nick was a CEO that was brought into a company called Binary Tree that one of our members, Steven Pivnik, had founded, and he was trying to position for sale and upgrade the talent, as some of you may have heard before. And Nick was the guy he identified and ended up bringing up into the company. So welcome, Nick.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
I think, Nick, this is just going to be great for founders when we think about bringing in people that are from somewhat larger companies, and even more to potentially replace ourselves, which was a bold move. So talk to us about a little bit about your prior experience before coming to Binary Tree first, to sort of set the stage.
Okay, so as you can tell, my accent, I'm originally from the UK. After graduating from university, I spent the first 10 years of my career in the British Royal Air Force. So I learned some discipline and how to shine my shoes well. And then leaving there, I joined, in my latter stages in the Air Force, I got into IIT, or it was so long ago, it was called ADP back then. And I left the Air Force and I joined what was then a pretty small company in the UK called Computer Sciences Corporation, CSC, which subsequently I spent the next almost 25 years rising through the ranks of CSC from a consultant all the way through for various account management roles to ending up as a direct report to the CEO in at that time was like a 100,000 people company and $16 billion and all the rest of it. So I had a very good career there. I was lucky enough to do some really interesting jobs, which brought me to the States. I also lived in Australia for a few years and really assimilated a huge amount of knowledge and expertise on how to run large-scale organizations. I left CSC in the early 2010s, and my first job leaving there was as the CEO of a private equity-backed company backed by Baird Capital, which was also in the IT services area. And then that company and Steven's company, Binary Tree, oftentimes coexisted with clients. They didn't do the same thing, but they provided complementary services. And when I became aware that Steven was looking to potentially bring in some additional executive help, he and I had always got on well when we'd met, and it became a great opportunity for me to push ahead with a different role.
Got it.
So that's 30 years in 2 minutes, kind of.
Well done. And what was the size of the company, the training company, the IT space prior to coming to Binary Tree?
The private equity company or the large corporation?
No, I get CSC, the one out.
Yeah, CSC is now it became DXC. It's morphed in its name, but that was a humongous company. Then the private equity company was mid-market. It was of a comparable size to Binary Tree. So I made a decision when I left the large corporate world that I didn't want to go and do the same thing again for one of CSC's competitors. I wanted to do a change. I wanted to have a more direct visibility of what I was doing and how it affected the business. I wanted to be a CEO. And I decided that I wanted to try that in a different financial structure, a different capital structure, and that's what led me into the private equity world. I have to say, and this is also relevant in the founder businesses, it actually is quite hard for someone. I found it quite hard. Maybe it's just me, but no, I don't think so. I've heard it from other people. It's actually quite hard to get into the smaller company space, having spent a lot of years in a big corporation. There tends to be an assumption that you had a bunch of flunkies who did everything for you, and you were kind of like carried around on one of those chairs, and you weren't really capable of doing anything for yourself. And so my initial forays when leaving CSC to get into the private equity world weren't successful. So I then decided to knuckle down. I did have about 12 months or so when I did run my own little company. We did consulting type work around IT security. And I started to get to the point where I think, well, should I look to get some investment in that? And then because I'd done that, it gave off the right impression to exec search companies and hiring executives that I didn't need somebody to do everything for me. I was quite capable of creating a business plan or whatever it was myself, and then that got me into the private equity space. And I think that was also important, that rolling your sleeves up and not needing somebody to do everything for you. In fact, the opposite with me. I maybe tried to do too much. I'm now an Adobe expert and all the rest of it. That was essential in being successful in certainly in the founder-owned company, because there aren't a whole host of staffers and people to do things for you. You've got to be willing to...
Nick, I'm gonna stop you there, because that's really a central issue that we're trying to get after, which is, a lot of entrepreneurs get dazzled by the resume, right? They see your big career and they go, "Oh my gosh, this guy's brilliant, executive vice president." And they bring that individual in, and they can't do the big to small translation.
Yeah.
You obviously made successfully, but what would you characterize as the differences, and why by the way, the fact that they were scared off on your big company experience is not inappropriate, because the success probability is not high. Yeah. Most people can't make that transition. You did. What would you say, like, were the differences, and why were you able to do it where maybe others might not be able to?
So I think part of it is a big part of it is personality. I'm trying to answer the question without just blowing smoke in my own direction. You for someone to be willing to do that, to be capable and enthusiastic about doing that, takes a certain personality. You've got to be reasonably self-effacing and modest, and the servant leadership things that I know Steven himself has always espoused. You've really got to be that person. You can't wear a cloak of that, but still inside be the kind of the corporate guy.
People figure that out. They'll figure it out in a second. Authenticity cannot be fake.
So the fact that I think I'd risen in CSC from very low level all the way through, so I'd seen everything at every level. I know what it felt like to be at this level, and then a mid manager and a senior manager and whatever. So I had walked a mile in the other people's shoes, and I was always willing to empathize with them and try and see things from their perspective. And I've always been, another things I'm involved in now, I'm on the alumni council, my business school, and I do various other things in the education sector. I've always been someone who's espoused lifelong learning. And as we were talking about earlier, the things I'm involved in now, completely out of what stuff I've done before, and learning how to do things and being willing to listen to other people explain how to do things was also in my DNA. So a lot of it's personality. I think the other side of the coin, the founder also is an essential part of the ingredient. The founder has to have a certain willingness to change, willingness to listen, but at the same time, a clear sense of what it needs to be successful in his or her company, and need to be willing to show up with that and make sure that the person that they're choosing to come into the role shows those same values. Steven and I didn't go through a long courtship. It has to be said. We went through it was relatively quickly, but we immediately fell into a very good, we fitted well, and I'm proud to say we still do. Several years on after exiting by a new tree, we're still close and and get along extremely well. So so that chemistry is really important.
So I know Steven well enough to know that it was probably a 2-martini interview process, and then there we go, right? But I want to just dig one step deeper on that, which is what would be, if I was trying to figure out if somebody had the right profile or didn't, they came from fill in the blank big company, IBM, Cisco, whoever.
Yeah.
What would you recommend as the 2 or 3 questions to figure out if they've got the profile to do small coming from big? You said, well, personality, but I'm like, tell me what question to ask to figure that out, right?
I think I would ask them and this was a proof point for me. So it's a demonstration thing. If you were faced with, let's say, a new opportunity with a big customer, because a CEO has to be capable of going out and meeting with customers, and there's a new opportunity with a big customer, and it's something we've never done before. What do you do? How do you approach that? And in my case, shortly after I got there, we had an opportunity to do, and this was post going there, but it's now becomes a good question. We had an opportunity with a company out in the Midwest, big client, something we've never sold before. And me and one of the most senior technicians that we had in the company put together the deck. We traveled out to middle of nowhere, Iowa, I think it was, or Ohio or somewhere, and gave the pitch. We didn't win the business, but the fact that I was willing to be the one who made the deck, I went to Kinko's to get it photocopied. I helped prepare the guy to give the pitch and whatever. That anecdote then got told, throughout the whole of the company, and everybody thought, oh, this guy isn't here just to tell us what to do. He's willing to do it himself. And I think so. A question that gets a potential CEO to show that they would do it themselves, that they would be there in the trenches with people, as opposed to telling them from back at HQ. That would be a good way to frame something.
Interesting. I like that one. I had a similar experience. One company I ran, within, I don't know, 3 days of starting the job as CEO, I was in front of clients, right? And I didn't know a damn thing, to be fair. I knew nothing, but I was learning and listening and meeting them. And it was noted, and I didn't realize how well it was noted around the organization, how quickly I got in front of clients. But it was everybody, I use a phrase, everything counts when you've got the job. Everybody looks at everything you do. So it all has symbolism and meaning.
For sure.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Like, what would be the other one? Without getting too personal, did you come from a privileged background, or sort of a, pull yourself up by your bootlaces kind of background?
Definitely not privileged, but not completely pulled myself up by my bootlaces. I don't have any inherited wealth, and I was the first one in my family to go to university and all that kind of stuff. But I wouldn't claim that there wasn't food on the table. But my mom was a school teacher. My dad was a commercial sales guy. But everything I've done, for myself. Everything I've achieved kind of been for myself. But and Steven and I had some of that in common. But I think the willingness to work, the determination to work, and to put your own effort into something is the way that you need to get at that personality question. That example I gave was one, but I'm sure there will be other ways of expressing it. Are you willing to put yourself into the equation, or are you just solving the equation with other people? And I fortunately, I've always been someone who I'm quite willing to put myself into the equation, and that worked very well with assimilation into binary tree.
Interesting. Yeah, I worry that if I asked it straight up, they'd give me, the right, in little air quotes, answer. Oh, sure, love to dig in with the family, get the team, get my hands dirty, and then we find out they're managing from their office. But moving on to binary tree. So you did follow a founder there, and a founder who'd been there for every minute of every second of the entire company.
Yep.
How do you follow that legacy and establish credibility? What did you do to sort of, because I know you had a relationship with Steven, which is great, and I want to get to that in a minute, but now you got to come in and go, here's the new guy, he's in charge. How do you establish with the team?
Well, I think, moving into a CEO role in a new company, not a company that you've been in for some, promoted into it carries even more the different things. But moving into a new company, really in any role, but certainly in the CEO role, you've got to have a balance. You've got to have a balance between the drive to implement the things that you got you the job, because typically you're in an interview and you say, oh, I can do this and we can do that. So that you're going to change some people, you're going to change some products, you're going to improve some processes, you're going to do this, whatever your manifesto was, let's call it.
Right.
You've got to balance that with the need to really learn about the business, to respect the fact that your knowledge of it is really superficial when you've been outside it. When you get there, you've got to learn how it actually performs. Where's the value really created? Who are the heroes? Who are the where are the tensions? Where's the hidden gems? How it really works. So it's that balance between, I guess it's the balance between listening and doing, which is always the case for a CEO, but extremely important in those first 60, 90 days. If you move too quickly, then the organizational or the body will reject the organ transplant, as one of my advisors once said to me. But if you move too slowly, you miss your opportunity, your authority is diminished, and people wonder, well, why the hell did we make the change then? So you've really got to have a plan. I had a plan about what I was going to do, but it had plenty of time in it to get out and about, meet people, listen to employees, customers, as you say, and partners, and then be willing to rethink that, cross that one out based on what people have told you, and also revisit the plan with the founder. As you say, he or hers or his DNA's in the company, and who better person to give you feedback on whether, well, that would work, but I wouldn't try that. You need to keep that relationship going. So it's really that balance between listening and doing. That's essential. And I think I've seen many, or I've heard of and seen people mess up because they've tried to do too quickly or too much because they think they know how it all ought to be. And if you don't respect the fact that the culture's different, the organization's smaller or needs to be more carefully nurtured into things, you can trip over yourself and then lose your audience.
How much of your original plan survived contact with the enemy, right? Sort of made it to the other side after, 6 months or so?
The vast majority of things that I expected that we would do, we did. Did we do them in 6 months? No. One of the things that you have to learn, and admittedly at times it was, I didn't ever really show this frustration. I'm good enough at managing my external emotions well enough, but you get frustrated in the fact in smaller companies you have to take smaller steps. Yeah. The organization is not really robust enough to do dramatic change, and frankly there are capital constraints. Things that you would be able to do in a larger company with more capital, you have to tread more warily. But by the time we exited the company, we'd made a very significant changes to the maturity of the company, the strength of the processes, the quality of the team, the portfolio of products was much stronger, much more future-proof. Or would we have liked to have done that in the first 18 months? Sure. But you have to temper your ambitions with the resources that you can muster.
Yeah. So did Steven move up to chairman of the board and you became CEO? Is that how the structure worked?
It was, yes.
So how did you guys, one of the things that we talk about here with, this can happen whether it's an outsider or a promotion from within. How did you establish the working relationship and sort of where the boundaries were for sort of when is it a Steven thing and when is it a Nick thing? How did you guys figure that out? And did you document it? What was your working model together?
Here I really have to hand it to, I know Steven's on the call, so I have to hand it to Steven, take my hat off to Steven. He was superb with this, and it was one of my biggest and thrills of the whole thing. He made it clear from day one that I was the CEO. I was making decisions. The decisions weren't his to make. He was the chairman, and his relationship when it came to decision making. I'm not saying he distanced himself from the people, but when it came to decision making, it was a decision between he and I on something, not him making a decision about what was the chief executive officer's decision rights. And we were fortunate. Well, Steven had already instituted a board, an advisory board, not with any fiduciary responsibilities, but an advisory board, and he chaired that board. And I came, and I insisted upon coming because I thought it was good. In fact, it was me who put the discipline into it, really. But I wanted that formality. We had a board meeting every quarter, and I came and represented the business, and I brought my team, and they presented. And Steven was the chair of that board, and any advice or redirection or whatever came through that, rather than it being kind of him directly into the business. And that was a joy. That worked extremely well. It suited both of us, and it made it very clear to anybody who did try to do the end around, oh, Steven, we shouldn't be doing this. He shut them down, and they didn't try it again, or they
nice. Oh, that's great. On the other side, did you run into any sacred cows? Sometimes founders have sort of sacred cows, things they created that they think are super great, and you might have a different view on it. And now we've got a difficult conversation. Did you run into any sacred cows, and how did that go down?
Well, yeah, there was one, but it wasn't really. It wasn't a major part. It was actually run as a separate offshoot to the business anyway, and it was a product for creating communal meetings, and I forget what Steven will remember. I forget what it was called, but it was an offshoot that wasn't shooting, and it had been around. It had been around a long time, and eventually, between me and these other board advisors, we prevailed on Steven to let go, and it went away. But pretty much everything else, what we faced, and one of the reasons that Steven looked to get me involved was some of the portfolio of Binary Trees products were facing medium-term obsolescence. They did a particular job, and the need for that job was running out, and we had to. One of the other complexities of this role and these times were we had to keep the people who made that product motivated, without them completely thinking they were in the land of the walking dead, whilst reinventing a new set of products that would sustain the company's cash and revenues into the future. And Steven was very good at, because that product set, the one that was facing the kind of medium-term obsolescence, that had been his baby. Yeah. He kind of became the spiritual leader of that group, if you like, let's call it that way. And I was working, because it was the future of the company and the valuation or whatever, on the newer stuff. So again, we had this nice, we had roles to play that complemented one another and didn't trip over one another as well, with those two different product sets.
Those things. It's a nice division of labor, critical job, but not one you should really spend a lot of time on. It was a great use of the chairman. Yeah,
but the fact that he was kind of like the leader of that group kept their morale up. Whereas if he wasn't there, then we might have had some significant attrition there, which we didn't want, because we still needed to keep selling that product until nobody used it again. We need to keep mining that seam, and that generated the cash to fund the new growth business. Yeah,
it's funny. You made me think. It's an offshoot that didn't shoot, so we shot it.
Yes, exactly.
Looking at the difference, the prior firm that you worked for was private equity run, and this one was privately held. How would you describe the differences between being a private equity CEO and a CEO of a privately held entity? What were those dynamics, and did one prepare you, or did you enjoy one better? What's your view on that?
Yes. To the last question,
you enjoyed it better. Yeah, it's hard not to. I think.
No, you say did you enjoy one better? I'll say yes, but I'll be politic enough not to say which one. I did work in the PE firm. But there are some similarities, and there's some differences. So the similarities were both the PE firm and the founder had goals and expectations that they wanted to be met. It wasn't one was a hard test, and the other one was a kind of an easy ride. there was financial results and a long-term plan and a mission to accomplish. So that was consistent. But the way that my interaction with those people and their interaction with the business is conducted is very different. The lens of the PE firm is very different to the lens of the founder. So the PE firm tend to see things almost entirely through metrics, the metrics reports that they received on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis. And their understanding of the business was primarily numerical. It was, this and that and X plus Y is not equaling Z and whatever, that was their understanding of the business. And it was also, their interaction was, apart from the quarterly board meetings, was entirely with me and the CFO. So they had that, and that took work. We had a regular reviews, and I spent, I wouldn't say majority of my time, but a significant part of my time was taken up managing that relationship with the private equity firm. And I think that's the case even in the private equity involvement in their companies varies depending on the style of the particular PE company and the particular maturity of the company and whatever it is. But in all cases, that there's that lens through hard data and formality. With the founder, he obviously had the lens of the people he previously worked with and his own eyes and ears. He was still active in the business. He still followed the stuff that went on the the corporate social news platform and all that kind of stuff. And he also had a much greater understanding of the business and how it operated than a PE firm does. So that actually set a higher bar for me as the CEO, in that I needed to be effective as the CEO and people to respect me. I needed to be equally as knowledgeable and as well tuned in to how the business was running and the pulse. What was the scuttle, as Steven was, which again comes back a little bit to that personality of the CEO. I enjoyed that, getting really understanding how the business was working and which department was having problems with which other department, and let's get in there and sort it out, that kind of stuff. So the difference between the roles. So in the former, in the P role, I was doing a lot of explaining externally. It felt like that. In the founder role, I was doing more time and attention internally, it's different. It's not. I wouldn't say that I was particularly suited to the founder role. Other people might find are more particularly suited to the PE role. That's why I avoided saying which one. I preferred one environment, but other people with a different personality would prefer others. I wouldn't say one is somehow inherently better than the other. They're just different.
Yeah, interesting. I think personal view is that, if your only lens is the lens of numerics and financial performance, you're not really looking at the whole picture in a way that you should. And, this is the bias at the MBA program level towards analytics. Become really good analytics. Yeah, that's not the whole answer in my estimation. So
I would agree with you, but you also have to recognize, and being fair to the people in the PE firms, they have a portfolio of the companies that they are working with, and they're also held accountable to a certain standard to people above them. Most of the people that you're working with in these larger PE companies, they aren't the heads. They're being requested to provide performance information further up the chain. And they don't really have the freedom of movement to have a more in-depth, nuanced understanding of things. So that structure is very, very different. But I don't want to be negative about it, because I brought some of that consciously into binary tree.
Sure, there's a good discipline to it, right? And that has value.
Yeah, we had by the second or third year, we'd taken some of the learnings I'd had from the PE company into our our path to value, as it was called, how we were achieving our metrics, what the goals were, and the formality of the quarterly board meeting. Right. That was good for us. It helped mature us. So it's just a blend, really. You like one of my other hobbies is cooking, and so you're like a bit of a chef. You kind of take a little bit from this recipe and a little bit of different spice there, and you blend the suitable recipe as suits the company and its circumstances at the time.
Absolutely. And you were brought in specifically to prepare the company and sell it ultimately.
That was explicit between Steven and I. It was never really explicit with the company until and they had a, you would have to have your head in your sand not to know that we were looking to build up the company. But at what point we would exit it, the rest of the company weren't really aware. But yes, that was my goal with Steven. Yeah.
Maybe last question, or maybe two more questions. One more is, what about the leadership team? So you inherited a leadership team, probably largely hired by the founder. And sometimes they make it, sometimes they don't. What sort of dynamic, what kind of change did you have to induce in the leadership team, after you spent some time evaluating and go, all of them are going to make it, or these two won't make it? And what did that look like?
We were very benign. We allowed people who'd been there a long time. There was one gentleman in particular who'd been the chief technology officer, who'd been there in the business with Steven for a long time, and we allowed him to move into a role that used the expertise and skills that he had, but because we needed to build this new product set, which wasn't his technology expertise, then we rebuilt a different development group to the side of him. Other people, while I was there, we had a rotation in the CFO. We needed a CFO who had the right discipline and the right experience to build some new financial systems and take us through the whole sale due diligence type process. But pretty much everyone else, unless they voted with their feet that they didn't want to be in an organization that now was just a little bit tighter on discipline, was just a little bit more process focused, was just a little bit, they would say a lot more, I would say a little more, whatever. It was more discipline, was more focused, didn't tolerate excuses as much, didn't allow people to dial it in, as they would say. Some people voted their feet and moved on. The majority of people, they weren't unhappy about that, but we shuffled people around. I was very conscious of I didn't want to kind of just say, well, get rid of all those, let's bring in a whole new team, which sometimes happens. And we worked hard to identify the roles that others that the people who are there could play that would enhance their career, but get them to use the skills that they had, and not bring in a whole bunch of new people. So the ratio of new folks to, we had a lot of new folks because the company doubled in size, but the majority of the people who were there on the day I started were there on the day we left.
Nice. Well, I think finding a home for somebody inside the organization, it's always the humane answer rather than just exiting them because it didn't work out.
Well, I'd say one example. There's a guy who I met early on in my stay who happened to like me originally come from the UK. He was in a relatively, I'll call it a mid-level role as a product manager, and he and I chatted about things that could happen. I went out to visit him out in Wisconsin, and by the end, he was leading a development group of 80 people, and really stepped up. We invested in some external training for him on management skills and that kind of thing, and he turned out to be a diamond in the rough. He really stepped up and has subsequently done well elsewhere. So yeah, we had a very let's try and make it work with these people approach, and only in a few exceptions did that not happen.
Nice. Maybe just to wrap up then, Nick, if you had maybe 2 things, 3 things that characterize your leadership style, sort of Nickisms or sort of what would you call out as sort of things that define me as a leader?
I think I like to, I'm defined by the success of the people around me. I want to see people, nothing gives me greater pleasure than seeing people, like the example I just gave, step up, take on a bigger role, shine in that, really improve their performance. So I'm definitely much more of a mentor and a coach than I am a manager. I'll manage when needs to be, if people need to be put straight, or, this people are dialing it in or whatever, I'll deal with that. But I would much prefer to be seen as someone who helped people improve and achieve their goals. And if they achieve their goals and I've distributed the goals correctly, then I'll definitely achieve mine.
Yeah.
So that's the main defining thing. I also don't, I take everything very seriously, but you wouldn't notice. I want humor. I think humor helps diffuse tension. I think humor helps people perform well. I want people to enjoy their jobs. I want people to go home or go out of their at-home office into the kitchen,
right,
feeling like work was fun today. I want people to have friends at work. I want people to feel as if they're valued, and that's not just for its own sake. That's with serious intent. I believe having a happy atmosphere helps people perform better. But I don't deliberately make jokes. I just naturally, want people to be having fun and enjoying what they're doing. So those would be a couple of things. I think also respecting the fact that people are in very different circumstances. People who are at their end of their career are motivated differently to people who are early in their career. People who've got a young family can't do certain things that people who are, the empty nesters can do, or, just recognizing that the individual, there's an individual there behind every face, every employee, and their circumstances are all different. And you have to find ways to motivate them and encourage them that are personal to them. And that's also a part of my shtick. So those would be a few things.
Well, I love how you picked up some American phrases, shtick. That's good. Well, look, Nick, this was fabulous. I think there were a lot of great insights here for founders, for hired gun executives, and for all of the audience. So thank you for sharing with us. I really do appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thanks. It was fun.
And we'll see you all next time on the Lazy CEO Podcast. Thanks for joining us.
This podcast is brought to you by the CEO Project. At the CEO Project, we work with CEOs to help them grow their business. And our members represent billions of dollars of revenue and profit. And frankly, amongst all of us, we've probably made every mistake in the book, including some you haven't made yet. So if you want to learn from the experience of a bunch of really seasoned CEOs, we're a great place to hang out. In this podcast, what you're going to hear are some of those ideas, concepts, and things that are just going to help you on your journey. If you want to find out more, reach out to us at theceoproject.com, or you can contact me personally at jim@theceoproject.com. Happy listening.
Thanks for listening to the Lazy CEO Podcast. We'll see you next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes, and check out our website, www.theceoproject.com.